what this session is today, what this class is, this is for constituents and households. So it's a beginner level class. It's for people who are just starting out with Bloomerang, whether your organization has just purchased the product, or if it's you've had Bloomerang for a while, you're bringing on new people and wanting to get them up to speed with adding in constituents, working with households, things of that sort. Or even if you've been working in Bloomerang for a while and you just kind of want to refresher on maybe some of the ins and outs of setting up constituents and households, you are in the right spot. Our agenda today, we're going to start by talking about some of the manual processes of adding, searching for constituents, things like that, talking about duplicates and how we can handle those. We're going to build out a household, a brand new household, and some relationships so you can see how those work. And we're also going to talk about some of the more I don't really want to say advanced, but it's a little bit above that beginner level with constituents as far as using custom fields to track additional data that you might need, and also using the import tool to not just add new constituents, but also to update existing constituents, which in my mind is one of the more powerful uses of the import tool. So we will wrap up today with that, and hopefully it's something that sparks some inspiration in what you can do with the import tool. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to hop into my demo database in Bloomerang and get some work done here. Make that a little bit bigger. So I'm in my demo database here. We are on the dashboard, as you're familiar with. Constituents. So the first thing obviously we're going to talk about is over here, your little icon with the two people. That's the home base for your constituents. So if you click on that, you have the little side panel that pops out. That's a pretty common feature in Bloomerang, especially with our sidebar here. You click on something, another menu pops out. And there are some different things happening within this sidebar that I'll briefly hit on now, but we'll talk about in a little more detail later. For example, right here is where you would search for any constituents in this search bar. So if you have you're looking for John Doe, type in John Doe's name and search, bring them up. Underneath that is recent accounts, and this can sort of cause some confusion with people as well, especially with newer users who might log in. Maybe you just ran an import and brought in all of your constituents. You imported 500 people, and you come here and you click on that constituent icon and see no one's listed under recent accounts and might panic a bit. But that's not really what the recent account section's for. This is a user by user function in Bloomerang. So you'll see this populate as we move on, but the idea here is if I were to pull up that John Doe account and be poking around on that account and then come back to my dashboard, the next time I click this constituents icon, that John Doe account would be linked in right here. So you could click and get straight back to an account you've been working on. So again, not something that's going to like list all your constituents there. That is going to be just a situation where accounts you've been working on recently will pop up. The last thing here, again, we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes, but there is the duplicate constituents feature, which you can find right here. You can also find that if you do have people showing up in that list up here in your notifications. If you click your notification bell, and I have mine hidden right now, but if we click that, I can see I have 13 possible duplicates. So if I were to click on that link right now, it'll take me to that duplicate constituent feature, and we could go through our duplicates and see what we need to do with them, but we will get to that in a little bit. So back into our constituents tab here, what we are going to focus on is we're going to start off by building a couple of new accounts. We're going to start from the beginning and just start off here by coming in and clicking the big new button at the top. So the first thing you are going to have to consider when you are making an account is whether it is an individual or an organization. Pretty straightforward with that, but the idea is, you know, if it's a business, if it's a company, if it's a church, if it's a donor advised fund, if it's the United Way, if it's something like that, if it's Charles Schwab, those are going to need to be built out as organization accounts instead of individual accounts. Individual is just going to be your human beings, your people who are donating, they're volunteering, maybe it's just a contact, a prospect that you want to donate later on down the road, but those are going to be your individuals. We're going to start by building out an organization account. So I'm going to come over here and click new on the organization tile. And that takes me to our page where we can start entering information. Now, this is very similar between when you're creating an organization and when you're creating an individual. You will have mostly the same fields. The big difference is that when you're working with an organization account, you're going to have a field up top here for organization name. So I'm going to go and put that in. We're building out the Yes Industries today. So I have the Yes Industries. And if you notice, when I type that in up here, it's also coming down and filling out my informal name, formal name, envelope name, and recognition name as well. So if you haven't noticed yet in Bloomerang, everything that's green, so when the text is green, it means it's required. So honestly, if you needed to, if you only had the name, you could save from now because that is going to be the only required fields. However, it's a really good idea when you are first starting up, building out the new accounts. If you have the information, go ahead and put it in now so you don't have to come back and touch the account again down the road. So if you have the address, if you have the email address, if you have the phone number, go ahead and make sure you get that entered here as well. I do have my primary contact, and that's another one of the differences between when you're building out your organization account as opposed to an individual account, is for an organization account, you have a place here to put in a primary contact. So my primary contact, I'm going to put in the first and last name here, is Daniel Bryan. And if you notice as well, when I put in a primary contact, it's changing these salutations automatically. You can update and change these however you would like. So if you wanted this to, the formal name to be Mr. Daniel Bryan, you could absolutely type that in. You could also add in the title here of Mr. And if you add in the title, it's going to produce the formula for the formal name there is going to be the title plus the last name. So we see here it went ahead and converted it over to Mr. Bryan for us. Again, anything, all these you can change at any time. It does sort of auto-populate when you start, but you can always come back in and make changes to those. I personally like trying to get those squared away while I'm creating the account, so I don't have to worry about going back in and messing with them later. If we scroll down a bit, I'm not going to fill out all of this information for this demo account right now, but just so you know, you'll have information for addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and social media here. When you're adding in, for example, an email address or a phone number or an address, you'll also have the type option here where you can choose, for example, for email, you could choose between a home and a work email. That way you can just sort of differentiate. Say you have this is probably more important for an individual constituent, but say you have an individual constituent and you have both their, say, Gmail account and their work email account that was provided by their employer. You can make sure you're tagging those one or the other. That way you can keep track of which is which. Same with phone, you'll have home, work, mobile, and fax. And with address over here, you'll have home, vacation, and work. The rest of the stuff we're going to talk about a little bit more when we create an individual account, but down here you have some more options with, say, our communication preferences and then some custom fields down below that. But let's say we're good with this. We have our Yes Industries, we have our primary contact. I like the salutation, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now we have this account for Yes Industries, and we can see here the primary contact is Daniel Bryan. We see the little briefcase icon next to the name, which is your indicator that this is an organization account. So when you're searching for accounts or if you're on an account and you see that briefcase, that's your giveaway that, yes, this is an organization account. And before we hop off of this, I am going to just real quick add a donation to this account just because it will come into play to demonstrate something a little bit later on during this class. So let's say the Yes Industries was being nice and generous, and today they gave us a $1,500 cash gift. And I'll save that. Not really pertinent right now. I just wanted to get that donation in there, saved and on their timeline. It will come up a little bit later for us. So we have an organization account created. Let's create an individual account. And then once we get that individual account created, we'll have some time to stop and see if you have any questions or if there's any concerns coming up so far. So I'm going to start back from the dashboard. And again, the same idea. I'm going to click on my little constituents icons here. And if you notice now, I have Yes Industries showing up under the recent accounts because I was just on that account working with it. So it's going to recognize that was a recent account I was working with and put it in this little section for me. I'm going to click New again, start a brand new one. This time we're going with individual. So the idea here, what I'm doing is I have my primary contact for Daniel Bryan for the Yes Industries, but Daniel is also an individual donor. So he doesn't just donate through his organization, he donates individually as well. So I want to make sure I have that individual account for him. So especially for tax purposes, at the end of the year, I know that the donations he's been making personally are going to be sent to him, whereas the donations he's been making through his organization will stay on that organization account. So I'm going to click new on individual. I'm going to go ahead and type in the first and last name, and you can watch as the names over here populate. So get the first name in there and Daniel will populate. Get the last name in there, and I'm fine with these. Again, if you want to change those up, you are more than welcome to. I'm fine with how this is set up. So let's look at some of a little bit more of the information here. So we do have, for example, for an individual, I know Daniel is male, so let's go ahead and put that in there. Don't need to track it, but I know it. I'm going to go ahead and toss it in there. I don't know his birth date, so I'm going to leave that blank. Employer I know because we just built that account. So I'm going to put in Yes Industries there. And then for job title, Daniel owns that. I know that information just through my relationship with Mr. Bryan. So I can enter this information. It's a good thing to think of that when you're adding this stuff in, any of that information that might come up handy down the road, go ahead. If you have that information, get it on the profile. Now, with some things, as we'll see in a little bit, we might not have a field for it, and that's where your custom fields will come into play, and we'll talk about those in just a second. Contact information, I'm going to go ahead and put an address and email in for Daniel. So let's say he's in Tacoma, and I'm going to make up a zip code because I do not know the actual zip code to Tacoma, Washington. I live in Indiana. That's a very long ways away. So we'll just pretend that's the zip code right now. And let's toss an email address in there. Obviously not a real email address, so we'll get a bad email flag on that, but just to get something in that field for demonstration purposes. I'm going to leave phone number blank and the social blank, but again, if you have that information, go ahead and put it in there. It can't hurt anything. Just if you have the information, toss it in. Down here, we have kind of our last section of default information for the profile, and that's going to be our communication preferences. And this can be very valuable for you as well. So for example, we have the preferred channel. And if I click into this dropdown, I can see here that's going to be, maybe Daniel said he prefers email. So I could choose that and just be able to know, hey, if I'm going to reach out to this constituent, their preferred method is through email. So I should email and not call them. You might not know that. You might have no idea whatsoever, and that's completely fine. But again, if you do, absolutely toss it in there. And then for communication restrictions, this would be something where maybe Daniel says, hey, don't call me. Like, feel free to mail me, send me emails all you want, but I don't want any phone calls. So I can choose do not call there. And where that really becomes powerful for you is you can use any of these fields as filters when you're reporting. So for example, if I'm building out a call list and I'm calling to say Giving Tuesday is coming up and I want to kind of ramp up and remind people about Giving Tuesday, and I add a filter in my report I'm building out for my call list for communication restrictions and choose do not call and probably do not solicit in there as well. And that would then remove any of those people from my list that have told me that they don't want phone calls or they don't want to be solicited. Outside of those is when we start getting into custom fields. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about custom fields because we do have resources and classes on custom fields that you can check out. The general idea here, and I really like to steal the line from Field of Dreams, where if you build it, they will come, and use the idea of if you build it, you can track it. So if there's a field or a piece of data in Bloomerang that we don't have a field for, that's when custom fields are going to become your best friend. So if you notice here, all of these under general info, that is the name of the category I gave to this custom, or the name I gave to the category of these fields. So that's going to be my header here. And then I have built fields for, say, attributes, organization type, and committees. And we'll just start with those for now. I absolutely recommend having at least one constituent custom field for something like attributes or tags or constituent codes, something that will let you easily tag constituents in different areas. So for example, let's say that Daniel is both a board member and a volunteer. So if I were to choose those, that makes it really easy if I want to, let's say, send an email out to all of my volunteers because we're having an event coming up and I need volunteer help. I could filter my email to be pulling for anyone. I could use this attributes field here as my filter and choose volunteer as the value and know that it's going to pull only people who are tagged as a volunteer into my results. So it just makes it a lot easier if you're tagging people with constituent custom fields to be able to pull those specific groups into reports, out of reports, into emails or letters, out of emails or letters. Maybe you need to track your board member giving. If you have them tagged as board members, it makes it a lot easier to run a transaction report and filter to only pull in your board members. So that way you can see how your board members are doing with their giving. Just a couple other examples I want to show you real fast is committees. That's kind of the same idea as attributes, but you can also do nice things with like volunteer information. These are all things you can put on a form in Bloomerang as well to kind of gather that information. So maybe Daniel's volunteer availability is just on the weekends, and he's great at events and fundraising, and also good at carpentry. So just ideas of things where you might be able to get more information onto their profile than what we provide by default by building out some custom fields. And that data might actually come in to be very, very helpful for you, especially in situations like this. I need a weekend volunteer to help fix a hole in my roof. I'm going to look for my volunteers whose skills involve some sort of building techniques. And then the last one I want to show you here is there's also things for like membership information. So it's nice to be able to say, okay, they are a current member and their membership expiration, let's say they are about to expire. So that way it's easy to see on their profile whether they're a member, if they are, maybe what type of membership, how long they've been a member, when that membership expires. So that way it's easy to run a report. You can report on their membership expiration date and say, hey, I want to see everyone whose membership is expiring next month, and then be able to easily reach out to those people and kind of remind them that their membership is expiring. So just a few examples real quick to show you about how some of these custom fields that you could build out, especially constituent custom fields for this, can end up being pretty valuable for you in the long run. So I'm going to save this, and this is a good stopping point. I'm going to hop back to the dashboard, and Diana, if we have any questions that might have come up.
Hi, yeah, thanks, John. Yes, we do have a couple of questions here for you. First, can you put in Mr. and Mrs. for individuals?
You can, but we don't recommend it. So the idea here is, let me pull Daniel Bryan back up. You wouldn't be able to add that as, for example, in the title. So you couldn't say like title is Mr. and Mrs. But if you did, for example, have an account where you built out an individual account for John and Jane Doe, you could, in the, say, like envelope name, just type in Mr. and Mrs. and then however you need it from there. However, and we'll get to this here in a minute when we're building out households, what we definitely recommend doing is having an individual account for both members of the household. So in that John and Jane Doe situation, you have an individual account for John Doe and an individual account for Jane Doe. And then you would join them together in a household that would be John and Jane Doe's household. And we'll see that in a little more detail here. That's actually going to be our next step we dive right back into after our little Q&A break. But you could, if you needed to have that individual account for both people, have the Mr. and Mrs., it would just be something you would need to type into the salutation fields manually here.
Awesome. Can you show us quickly how to add if someone has more than one phone number or email or address?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me save this and we'll get back to Daniel's profile here. So on the profile page, so let's look at emails, for example. Right here in the email section, again, I'm just on the profile tab of Daniel's profile or account here. There is the edit button to edit the one that you currently have. And then the plus button allows you to add new. So we already have this. Let's add another one and it'll sort of show you what the other one is here. Let's say add a work one. And we'll just do D Brian at Yes Industries. And then if we save that, now we have the two email addresses. And for example, if I wanted the work email to be the primary, I could come in and click edit, check this primary option there, and save. And now that work email would become the primary email address for Daniel.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about households and relationships. So we're going to talk about relationships first before we build out a household. We're going to be living on Daniel Bryan. So this is the Daniel Bryan story today. So we're going to be living on his account. But if I come over here, same idea. These tabs are kind of where you navigate within the account. The summary page is going to show you a summary of their giving. We don't have any on this account yet, and some like any of their recent timeline activity, as well as their engagement level and their generosity, which I'm glad I clicked on this. Let's take a quick little tangent. This is some pretty important information as well. It can help you quite a bit. On the summary page, you have their engagement level, which is going to show their kind of, I hate to use the same word in the definition, but their engagement with your organization. So how into your organization are they? Are they donating a bunch? Are they opening emails? Are they reaching out to you, etc.? And it's a cold to on fire scale. So this is a new account we just created. It's going to be cold, but the more activity they get, the higher that will bump up. So it's a good thing to think of. The people who are showing on fire with engagement might be the people who are going to be much more likely to give more often, give larger, help out more often. And then beneath that is that generosity score. And this is pulled from donor search, it's pulled from public records. So it's more of their idea of their charitable giving, not necessarily with your organization, charitable and political giving. Also things like real estate holdings, business affiliations. So it's kind of a big wealth screen thing through donor search that's going to show their generosity score. And again, that is a cold, cool, warm, hot, on fire scale. So the people who are on fire typically have a larger charitable capacity than the people that are down on the cold end. But I do always like to say, especially when I'm talking about generosity here, is that you know these human beings better than the just public record data does. So while it's a great indicator, it's an absolutely wonderful indicator, and especially a good place to start off with if you're trying to find a group of people that say are hitting that on fire range. But never, I encourage people to try to not take the human element out of it. As far as you know these people, you might have more inside information on who they are, what they can do but it's a great place to get started, especially. So let's hop into the relationships tab. This is where you'll manage both relationships and the household system. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a relationship between Daniel Bryan and his company, Yes Industries. So if I look down here in relationships, I'm going to click the big blue new relationships button. So the first thing we do is we want to find the constituent who is the other half of this relationship. So relationships are always a two-way street. You have to define both parts of the relationship. So what I'm going to do is click the Find Constituent button. And I know I'm looking for Yes Industries, so let's type that in and search. And then I can just go ahead and click on Yes Industries here. So now it's telling me that Yes Industries is the blank. If I needed to change that, I could click back in that button and search for something else, but we're good with Yes Industries. So this is where we're in this, I'll be honest, it confused me the first time I looked at it, but it helps a lot to kind of try to read this section out loud. You don't have to read it out loud, but read it as a sentence maybe, just to really drive home the idea of, in this drop down, we are defining which role in the relationship Yes Industries plays. So the company is the, and click in there. And we have some in here that are kind of are pre-made, but you can always add more relationship values. So for example, I'm going to go with just an employer-employee relationship. But if you wanted to, you could create a value for, say, company and owner, and set Daniel as the owner and Yes Industries as the company. I'm fine personally with the employer-employee, so that's what I'm going to stick with here. So let's click employer. So Yes Industries is the employer. Daniel Bryan is the employee. And if I want to, maybe I add the note over here and say Daniel is the owner of Yes Industries. And if I save that, now we have that relationship there, and we can see Yes Industries and it's showing employer. The other nice thing is if I click on this little drop down, I can go to that related constituent. And if I go to my Yes Industries account here and click on relationships, it adds in that relationship already. So since that relationship is a two-way street and you're defining the role for both members within that relationship, it is going to automatically add it to the other account that you were not working on, because we built it through Daniel's account, but it went ahead and added that Daniel is the employee there for Yes Industries. So another relationship that's going to be super common, and again, you can have fun with this. You can sort of create some, if you have some very specific relationships, especially maybe within your organization, or maybe you work with an organization that has people who do a million different things, and you want to be able to track what their specific role is with that company, that organization you're working with. You can always add different roles, but the other might be the spousal relationship. So if I click new relationship here, I'm going to find the constituent, and I'm going to find Daniel's spouse. So I've already entered her in here. So if I go find constituent and search for Jennifer Bryan here, Jennifer Bryan's the spouse. So if I click there, I can say Jennifer Bryan is, and again, you can go husband, wife, partner, any of that works just fine. I'm going to go ahead and set this one to Jennifer Bryan as the wife and Daniel Bryan is the husband. And we'll save that. So now in my relationships, I can see, okay, Daniel's relationships with other people I know in the organization, or within my database. We have the company, his employer, and wife, Jennifer Bryan here. So we have the relationship set up. But the bigger part of this, at least in my mind, and not necessarily bigger, but the part that kind of has more functionality as far as Bloomerang is concerned, because we are really set up to operate on the household system, as opposed to creating like that one account for Daniel and Jennifer Bryan, is having the two individual accounts and putting them together. So here's how we would do that. So from Daniel's account, I'm going to come over here and click on new household. So the first thing it's going to have me do is fill in the household names. So I know we have Daniel and Jennifer. So I'm going to say Daniel and Jennifer Bryan. That's going to go ahead and populate the rest of these fields for me. I'm going to do at least one thing here. I would definitely recommend this part is for the sort name. This is how they would be sorted alphabetically when you are sorting by the household name column in a report. So what I would always recommend here is getting rid of the last name from the back end and putting it at the front with a comma. That way, if we're sorting by alphabetical and it's showing the household account, they're not going to be sorted in the D's for Daniel. They will be in the B's for Bryan. And then again, maybe I want to go through right now and get rid of the last name for informal name. And here maybe I want to say Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Bryan. Maybe I have a really strong relationship with Daniel and that's how they want their official communications coming out. But just to kind of demonstrate here that you can absolutely change these up to fit your needs, what your individuals want to be addressed as, you can always come in and edit these. And these are the fields that are going to pull in. So say you're sending an email, say you're sending a letter, and you put a merge field in for envelope name, for example. It's going to pull in whatever you have in that field for that account. And then the last one on here for recognition name, that is good, especially say if you have somebody, you're putting out your annual report and this donor said, hey, I want to remain anonymous. You could always come in here for recognition name and just enter anonymous there. And that way, when you're putting that together for your annual report, just make sure you're using the recognition name merge field. And anyone that wanted to remain anonymous, it will just show up as anonymous for their recognition name. So I'm going to save this. And now our household account is created. So if you see here, we have that Daniel and Jennifer Bryan household, and you'll see on household accounts, much like the organization accounts had the little briefcase by it, your household accounts will have a house next to it. And it will also put that underneath the constituent's name on their individual account. So if you wanted to quickly get to the household account, you can just click on this. And that's going to take me to the household account. So I have Daniel in, now I need to add Jennifer. So this is the second step of creating your household. You have one spouse in, now let's go in and add the other. And then maybe add the children after that, or whatever you need to do to fill out the household. So what I'm gonna do, since I'm already on this page, is I'm gonna come down again, I'm gonna click my little drop down arrow and go to related constituent for Jennifer. So now I'm on Jennifer Bryan's, and we can see here, Jennifer does have a couple of transactions on the account. Daniel's did not, but Jennifer does. So let's go ahead and go to relationships. And we already have that relationship clicked, but just building the relationship does not put them together in the household. They are separate items. So Jennifer's not yet in a household. So this time, instead of clicking new household, since we just built that Daniel and Jennifer Bryan household, we're going to click join household instead. And I'm just going to search for the last name here. And I see my Daniel and Jennifer Bryan household. I can click on that. And now both Daniel and Jennifer are in the household. Excuse me. So what happens when you build the household? One of the nicest parts of it is if we look at Daniel's account here, we can see here that Daniel has no transactions. If we go to the timeline, nothing going on with Daniel's account. If we look at Jennifer's, Jennifer does. Jennifer has 2 transactions this year, both for $100. So if we go to the household account, those transactions, you see the household here, we're on that Daniel and Jennifer Bryan household account. Those transactions are going to show up on that timeline. So I like to think of the households as aggregate accounts. Basically, they hold all the information and combine all the information from both individual members. So if Daniel made it, say Daniel goes online today. Actually, let's just do that real fast. We're not going to do it online. But if we notice here on the household account, we have those 2 $100 donations. If we're on Daniel's account now, and we come in and add a new donation, and let's say made it a little bit further back for $50. So now Daniel has the 1 transaction on his timeline. If I go back to the household now and refresh, we have all 3 transactions showing up on the household timeline. So this way it makes it to where you can communicate, report on, dive a little deeper on either the individuals within the household or the household as a whole. And also the same with communications. You can reach out to the individual members of the household, or you can reach out to the households as a whole. So for end of year tax purposes, for example, Daniel has 1 transaction, Jennifer has 2. If I'm running my tax letters for the household, all 3 of those transactions are going to be showing up in their letter since they're all under that household sort of banner, if you will. Diana, that might be a good time to see if there was a question. Households are typically a fun area for that.
Absolutely. How do we decide who would be the head of household?
Oh, great question. Um, the short answer is I can't tell you that. It's completely up to you. The long answer is my recommendation is whichever member of the household you have a stronger relationship with is the person I would make the head of household. Now, you might have situations where both spouses are equally donating, the same amount. They're everything they do together, nothing separate. You don't talk to one more than the other. But I feel like in most cases, there's one person that is more of your contact point than the other person might be. So I typically recommend just whomever you have that stronger relationship to make the head of household. Now, when you create the household, whoever is added to that household first is going to be the head of household, but you can change that at any time. So I'm in my relationships tab here. And so if I wanted to make Jennifer the head of household instead of Daniel, I can just come over here next to Jennifer's name and click my little drop down button, choose make head of household. I absolutely am sure. And now Jennifer's the head of household. So you can switch that at any time. It really does not play a huge role. One of probably the biggest functionality for it, and we'll talk about that at the end, is if you are importing to households, anything you import to a household will go to as far as like timeline information. So if it's an interaction, if it's a donation, etc., that is going to land on the head of households account because it has to go to an individual account. So that's really the main functionality for choosing who the head of household is. But outside of that, honestly, it's really a preference thing and I like to just make that recommendation. I'm not saying that's the be all end all, but I like making that recommendation of just whichever member you might have a stronger relationship with.
Awesome. Another great thing that I like to think about it is the household inherits whoever the head of household's contact information is. So for example, for me and my husband, I typically use my work email and my work address, and he has on his account our home address. So whichever address we want to send our mail to, we'll choose the head of household based on that. We have an interesting question here. So a lot of our attendees today have noticed that you can't add a donation to the household account, but what if you want to thank the household or see a report by household? Is there a way to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. A lot of very awesome, on top of it, bright people joining the session today, which is great. You cannot add donations to a household account. So if we go into our household account here, you'll notice that big blue button is gone. You cannot add timeline information. But let's do this real fast. I'm going to go into a report and let's go with just a quick constituent report. And let's do this. I'm going to add a filter just to kind of demonstrate this to you. So I'm going to add a filter here for is in a household. That's a nice filter that can be used to kind of just pull in. So you can see now I have 63 constituents that have been put into a household, right? And when you're in a constituent report, if you click on up here where it says constituent and change that to household, it's now going to be looking at the household account. So I can see here now it's saying Daniel and Jennifer Bryan. If I'm on constituent, let's find, where are they? Lots of Brady's. The Brady bunch always takes up space. So I have Daniel Bryan, an account for Daniel. And let's add a column in here. Let's say year-to-date revenue, just so you can see the money change as well. I lost it. There it is. So if I go down here to Daniel Bryan, $50, Jennifer Bryan, $200. Because remember, Jennifer had the two $100 transactions. Daniel had the $150 transaction. So they're split apart right now. If I switch constituent to household, now I have Daniel and Jennifer Bryan for $250. So if you're in a report like this, constituent report especially, and you change constituent to household, it's going to put your household accounts together where applicable, but it will still show people not in a household. It will still show organizations. I just had this filter in there to kind of limit the results because I have a lot of nonsense happening in my demo database. So I wanted to clean up the noise a little bit to make it easier to find the people we were looking for. You can also, if you are in a transaction report, so let's say here, let's go constituent, find constituents. And let's go ahead and choose that Daniel and Jennifer Bryan household. So this is just a way to kind of pull in one constituent in all their transactions. So in a transaction report, I wanted to show you this because it's a little bit different. We can see here we have 2 transactions from Jennifer and 1 transaction from Daniel. But if I go to the details tab, and I click export households, now I can see all 3 transactions are showing up with the household name because it's showing that household information. And the last little bit I'll show you on this is that if you're in, so let's say I'm in this February 2019 acknowledgement, doesn't matter what the letter is, it's just a general acknowledgement letter. In the details tab, where it says create 1 letter per, if I have that set to household and the people are in a household, it will address the household as a whole instead of the individuals. So if I ran this letter right now and I'm only looking at Jennifer's most recent transaction, if I have it set to say create 1 letter per household, it would still say dear Daniel and Jennifer because I'm addressing that household. If I had it set to 1 letter per constituent, in that case, it would address Jennifer specifically because I'm telling it to look at the individual constituent. So it's kind of a little bit all over the place there, but in reports, you can change how you're grouping constituent to households, and in letters, emails, when you're, sorry, not emails, but letters, when you're looking at creating these acknowledgements, as long as in the details you're creating 1 letter per household, it will address the household and total all of their donations collectively. Any others, Diana?
Awesome. One last question on households for now. I know this is a hot topic, but it seems like we're creating several constituents accounts. There's right now the 2 people in the household plus the household itself. What are the benefits of tracking them individually and then putting them in a household together?
Yeah, it's kind of like I hit on earlier of you can address people individually or as a household together. You can keep those donations sort of separated but collective at the same time. So that way you can see which individual is donating, but at the same time send out acknowledgements, address them as that household as a whole. There's the idea of if you have those individual accounts, because emails are an individual thing, you can't email a household because emails should be a one-to-one item. Like one person has their email, another person has their email. So if you have them, say you're sending out an email to, let's use Daniel and Jennifer Bryan, for example. And let's say that Daniel had donated 3 times, Jennifer has never donated. If I have them built in that household system and I want to send like just a general thank you to people who have donated this year, if I'm filtering my emails based on households, it's going to send an email to everybody that has a unique email address in that household account. So the Brady Bunch is a good example where if I'm filtering by households in my email and I send that out, it's sending to everybody. It's sending to Peter, it's sending to Marcia, it's sending to Jan, it's sending to Bobby, it's sending to everybody that's in that account that has that email address. And kind of to like alleviate the some concerns some people have, is because you mentioned that idea of creating multiple accounts. Just so you know, for your license limit purposes is in the number of constituents you can have in the database, the household account only counts as one record. So I have 3 accounts total for that Daniel and Jennifer Bryan account, the individual account for Daniel, the individual account for Jennifer, and the household account for both of them combined. All 3 of those together are only going to count as one record towards my license limit at the end of the day. So it's not something that's going to like bloat your license limit. And it is really kind of how the database is set up to function, as far as especially communications and being able to really separate the transactions onto the separate timelines, the interactions onto the separate timelines. Then if for any reason the household splits, if you have those donations on those like on Daniel's timeline and on Jennifer's timeline, and they get divorced and separated and they split, if I remove them from the household, Daniel's transactions are still on Daniel's timeline. Jennifer's are still on Jennifer's timeline. They're just not getting combined into the household anymore. And Diana, if you had anything else to add, you're more than welcome.
Oh, thank you. That was wonderful.
Awesome.
Last question on household, and I know this is kind of a sad, tricky topic, but what if someone in the household becomes deceased? How do you handle the household?
Yeah, so I am actually very glad that that question was asked because it does come up a lot. So let's just go to this household. So what you would want to do is the first thing is if I go to the profile here and I go to edit. Oh, sorry, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm on the wrong thing. So let's go to relationships so I can get to one of the individuals. I need to be on the individual account. So the first thing I would do is mark the individual as deceased. So let's say Jennifer passes. So I'm going to click on here I'm going to click on her name here. Open up Jennifer's account. Go to the profile. I'm going to edit. And I'm going to change status to deceased. And I'm going to save that. Now, a lot of times that's where people stop and it can cause some issues. So here's where you kind of have a couple of options. I marked Jennifer as deceased. So now if I'm back in this household account, I could do kind of one of two things. I could click here on this button and choose leave household and remove Jennifer from the household. And then at that point, probably go ahead and remove Daniel as well, since there's only one person in the household. It's not doing us a whole lot of good. Or we could do something like this, where let's say we're going to make Daniel the head of household now. And then in my mind, the most important part of this is going into the household account here, going to the profile tab and editing the profile to make sure that you change the naming conventions. So if Jennifer is deceased, I'm probably going to want to come in here and remove her name from the salutations. Now, that being said, I have come across situations where I've heard from people that they have constituents who still want their deceased spouse's name on the recognition. It might be a situation where let's say Jennifer was the one that was really, really, really dedicated to the cause, really dedicated to the organization, and Daniel is still supporting in her honor, more or less, because she wanted it to happen. And he likes having her name put in on those communications. So it might not be a bad idea at that point to kind of have that conversation with the donor during, reaching out for condolences and kind of asking how they might want to be, how they might want their name to appear in communications moving forward. But yeah, it's kind of a twofold. Mark the individual as deceased, definitely update the naming conventions on the profile of the household account. And then it's kind of your call as to whether you're going to just dissolve that household entirely, or you might leave it in there at least for a while to have that historical data in there as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, John.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's real quick, because we went down some awesome rabbit holes there, let's talk about searching for constituents, because this one is kind of fun. Maybe not, but kind of fun. So let's say I want to pull up that Daniel Bryan account again. So I'm going to search for Daniel Bryan. And the first thing I notice here is, I have a duplicate. So I created this newer one with the higher account number today. Already had one in for Daniel. Did not need to do that. My bad. So it's not a bad idea to search for the constituents you're adding. If you're adding someone manually, especially if you have multiple people working in the database, if you're the only person running it, you probably have a good idea of who you've already added. But if you have multiple people adding data, it's not a bad idea to do a quick search for the constituent and see if they pop up. But one thing before we kind of move on to deal with this duplicate is when you're searching in Bloomerang, we use a fuzzy search. So it's going to pull in the best possible results at the top, but you might get some weird results in as well that might not make total sense until you like really start to think about it. So the idea here is I search for Daniel Bryan. Yes, it makes sense that Daniel's here, the household's here, Daniel's wife's here, same last name. Yes, Industries is here because Daniel's the primary contact there. But Caitlin Ryan's kind of a weird one, but that's going to get pulled in because the last name is close to Brian. So it's down at the bottom of our list, but that's kind of how that fuzzy search works. So it does help, especially if you have people with more unique name spellings, where you might miss a letter, but that fuzzy search is still hopefully going to pull them in if it's a close enough match. Another thing to think of here is you can search for things off of things like address. So if I search for Workman there, I can bring up Daniel here, Jennifer, because they're at that Workman Avenue address. But I also got Norman because Norman is kind of close to Workman. And that one just makes me giggle a little. So you are going to get some interesting results when you're searching. Just know your prime results are going to be at the top, but it can be a lifesaver if you're like not 100% sure how the name's spelled and you just get it close, it will likely pull in the right results for you. So let's talk about those duplicates. I have 2 Daniel Bryan accounts. How do I handle that? So I mentioned earlier in this constituent slide out bar here, we have the Yes Industries, or sorry, I just saw that and talked, the duplicate constituents feature. So I'm going to come down here and click on that. And this will take you to a section where potential duplicates are found. And the biggest thing you'll see here is this green where it's telling you why they're matching. Again, anyone with the same email address is going to pop up as a potential duplicate. So for example, I know that this random Test Williams account I created and Marty Skrull are not the same person. They're just matching because I put the same email address in for them. So if I click on this, it's going to open up kind of the preview pane for the merge and will let me know if I do want to merge, which account I want to keep. You're not going to lose information when you merge, but all of the information. So for example, if I look here, there are 4 transactions and 1 interaction. The Test Williams account has no transactions, but 2 interactions. If I were to merge these, we can see here that like these interactions are getting moved over into the account we're keeping. So you're not going to lose data on this. You might lose things like this, like the name. But outside of that, if there's an extra address, it will just add that extra address onto the account you're keeping. For this though, I'm going to mark this as not a duplicate because this is not a duplicate. And what that does is it will tell the system that, hey, these 2 accounts, not the same. Don't tell me about it again. So if you do have people popping up in your duplicate constituent section, and you want to get them out of there that are not duplicates, you can open them up and then click not a duplicate. And that will get rid of them from there. The other side of that is, so I have my 2 Daniel Bryan, so they matched off name, they matched off address, they have the same address, that's why they're in here. If I click on this one, now I can see, okay, I have these 2 accounts, and you can sort of scroll down through and see, all right, this is account 331. This one is the one that we put in the household, which is never a bad thing to keep in mind. We scroll down, we have some more information here, same address, couple different email addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and merge these 2 because I don't want that duplicate. So I'm going to choose keep this account. And we can see here our 13 transactions got moved over. Our extra email address got moved over. So again, not losing data, just sort of pushing that all into one account. And then if I click merge, I'm absolutely sure they fall off my list. And if I come back in again and I search for Daniel Bryan, I now just have the one individual account and the organization account for Daniel and Jennifer. Sorry, not the organization, the household. There's another way to merge as well, and I'll show you that. So let's say that Daniel called me up and says, hey, that donation I just made through my organization through Yes Industries, that came out of my personal account. That needs to go onto my personal profile. I'm going to be donating individually, not through the organization. So I want to now merge this organization account, Yes Industries, in with my Daniel Bryan account so that all that information, all those transactions are on his personal account because that's where the money's been coming from. So let's open up Yes Industries and how you can merge from an account. So you can merge manually from an account as well. So if you know two accounts need merged, if we click on profile here, and then we come over here by this edit button, there's this small drop down arrow. If we click on that, we can choose this merge option. And I want to merge with Daniel Bryan. So I'll search for Daniel Bryan. But unfortunately, nothing's coming up. The reason for this, and I wanted to just kind of show you this, is that Yes Industries is an organization account and Daniel Bryan is an individual account. And you can't merge the two together. So what we have to do first, and this doesn't have to be just for merging, it can be for all sorts of things. One thing that might happen is you might have somebody donate online on behalf of their organization, but since they're using their credit card information, it comes in under their personal name. It's an individual account that gets created, and you need to switch that over to an organization account. Same idea here, but we're going the other way, organization to individual. So that same button we found, the merge option, we're going to choose change type. And so since Daniel is already the primary contact, that information's filled in. It's just entering the naming conventions here. Everything else will stay the same. And if I click OK, now this account, this 443 account, is an individual account. The little briefcase went away. So if I click here again and choose merge, look for Daniel Bryan, I'm going to keep that 444 account. So let's click on that. I want to keep that 444 account because that's kind of my master account for this, if that makes sense. That's the one that all Daniel's stuff is, and we're kind of moving this former organization account into his personal account. So I'm going to click this arrow here, and that flips it over. Whichever way the arrow is pointing is the account you're going to keep. And it will kind of tell you we're keeping this one, we're merging this one. And I can go ahead and click merge. And they're merged together. So just to kind of show you that, if I come in now and say Yes Industries, I have nothing. No results for Yes Industries. That account is gone. But if I pull up Daniel Bryan's account again, and remember that donation I made right when we created the Yes Industries account, if I go to Daniel's account, now that $1,500 donation that we thought was on behalf of the organization is now on Daniel's personal account instead. The other place you can get to those duplicates is up here in your notifications, and you've probably seen this already, but if you click on the notification bell, again, I have mine hidden, but we click there, and if I click you have 11 possible duplicates, that's going to take you straight to that same page where you can manage your duplicates from there. And Diana, I know we're flush on time here.
Looks great so far. It looks like most of the questions that we have are around households, and we will definitely follow up with those whose questions we can't get to live today.
Awesome. Well, I've got one more thing I could kind of get through quickly if we've got another 5 minutes.
Sounds good. And if people need to hop off, don't worry. We will make sure to send the recording so you don't miss out on anything.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. All right. Sorry for running late, folks. Sometimes I get going and I just talk and talk and talk. And we had such good questions. But I definitely wanted to show you this. This is less revolving around actually like adding constituents, but using the import tool to update constituents. So if I were to run a constituent report, if I run a constituent report from scratch, this is how you get a list of all your constituents. So this is going to be everyone in the database. These are all clickable. So I like to right click and open in new tabs if I want to get to somebody's profile. But if I wanted to go to Darby's profile, right click, open in a new tab, and there we are. The thing I really want to talk about here is that you can use run a report, export it to Excel, and then import back in to update constituents. So 2 use cases where that might be really nice. So let's say I just built out a constituent custom field for attributes, and I want to add that to my constituents, but I don't want to open up every profile one by one and add those in. So what I might do is come in and add a column here for attributes. I'll drag that up towards the front so we can see it a little better. So I have my attributes column here, and you can see I already have some people filled out with information in there. But what you could do now is, say you just added this new custom field, and you want to tag everybody in your database with it. You could run this report and export it to Excel, and then go through that spreadsheet, that import file, and add in the values. So member, board member, volunteer, whatever it may be in that attributes custom field column, and then import that back into Bloomerang to update your constituents. So if I were to export this out and say for Darby, I were to put volunteer in that attributes column, when I import it back in, it will tag Darby as a volunteer in that attributes column. And then another really nice use case for this is, let's say I set this to household. And again, I'm going to add that filter in for is in a household. This isn't a bad thing to think about doing. And I'm going to talk while I delete some columns here. This isn't a bad thing to think about doing when you have the time, the resources, maybe once a year, maybe every 6 months. But the idea of what I'm going to show you here is, I'm going to get rid of all the contact information and replace those, just add column, and I'm going to search for name. And I'm going to replace those with just like the naming conventions for the household. So I'm going to come in and say formal name. I'm going to say informal name. I'm going to say recognition name, sort name, envelope name, and add those columns in. So now I could export this list to Excel and go through and see if there are any changes I wanted to make. I personally like the idea of keeping my household naming conventions very uniform. As you can see here, I'm not following that very well. So like the Seinfeld household, the SpongeBob household, I have some that are like the Blues and the Brady Bunches, but then I have others that are John and Jane and John and Jane Doe. So maybe I want to export this list and go through my spreadsheet and just make all of those uniform, or go through and make changes, make sure things are capitalized properly, make sure I'm using the ampersand everywhere instead of and, or vice versa. And the beauty of this is that anytime you export a constituent report from Bloomerang, it's going to include their Bloomerang account number. And that Bloomerang account number is an automatic match when you're importing back into Bloomerang. So it makes it real easy to sort of export your list from Bloomerang, make changes in those columns, those different fields, and then import it back in to do something like this, like to update your household names in mass instead of having to look at them one by one by one.